everyone, and welcome to Chapter 2 of our textbook. We are going to talk about, so I got my iced coffee as my life source. We're going to talk about research in abnormal psychology today. I know if you took Psych 150 with me or, the other wonderful instructors here, you've learned a bit about, research methods in psychology, and that's really important to understand because we're not just making guesses, especially in abnormal psychology. We're not just making guesses on how to treat people. We're using evidence-based practices, right? And so what we're going to talk about today is a bit, let me share this full screen, excuse me. So what we're going to talk about today is what do clinical researchers do? We're going to look at the case study, the correlational method, and the experimental method. And so we're going to make sure we hit all these subpoints too. But I just want to make sure we have a solid understanding of how psychological research is conducted before we proceed with the rest of the chapters. Cool? All right, I'm going to keep going. So with our topic overview continue, we're also going to talk about alternative research designs. So outside of those big three we hear a lot, which a majority of psychological research comes from, we are going to have match designs, natural experiments, analog experiments, single subject experiments, longitudinal studies, and epidemiological studies. I know this is a lot, this is a mouthful right now. But we'll get through it, and I think you'll find it's better than you thought. It's very interesting how we try to make this as systematic as possible, as objective as possible. We're going to make sure, and we're going to review how we protect our human participants, considering all the horrible things that have happened in the past with research on people, and kind of like future methods in our text of keeping an eye on research methods, how they change. So, what do clinical researchers do? They are there's a difference between a clinical practitioner and a clinical researcher, and that lies in that second word. Researchers conduct research. They are trying to discover universal principles of abnormal functioning. They're trying to get those general trends. So when we look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychological Disorders, let me get it. When we look at the manual, this book has all the psychological disorders, as of right now, and the criteria for having those disorders and risk factors and all those things. And that is thanks to, abnormal psychological researchers. They're trying to find those general trends and universal principles for different psychological disorders. So that is what we call a nomothetic understanding. So we're just looking at the nature of the disorder, the causes, and the treatments for it. Now, they're trying to measure elusive concepts, right? So I want you to think about defining anxiety. By definition, what do you think that is? Maybe it's a state of worry, excessive worry, apprehension. What is it? What behaviors go with anxiety? What physical symptoms come with anxiety? That's what researchers are looking for, because one person's symptoms and description of anxiety may not match another's. So we're trying to find those commonalities to be as general as possible. Right? Say, in general, this is what we find, but people will vary based on individual differences. Clinical practitioners, on the other hand, are going to develop what's called an idiographic understanding. So an individualistic understanding to practice and implement the information, kind of like the researchers find. They are going to look at someone's background. That's what, through their assessment. They're going to look at their background, maybe their family, their history of behaviors and diagnoses. They're going to diagnose them, and they're going to treat them according to a systematic therapeutic plan. So that's the difference between clinical researchers and clinical practitioners. Now, in terms of our methodology, we are going to look first at case studies. So case studies are wonderful in that they illuminate very detailed information. They are going to be a detailed description of a person's life or psychological problems. Now, this picture of this woman you see on the left, this is a woman known as Sybil. There was a book based on her and some movies about her psychological disorder called multiple identity disorder, but that was the previous term. Now it's dissociative identity disorder, and we're going to talk about the differences. If you right-click the picture, I don't know why it's not showing me now. But if you right-click the picture, you should be able to open the hyperlink that I've attached. Ignore me trying to do it. Let me know if you can't, because it's an NPR special about how her multiple personalities were kind of faked. And that's not to say all people with that disorder fake it, or that therapy doesn't work, or whatever. It's just showing how biases in research can affect how a client perceives their disorder, right? So it gives all of this information about how she kind of believed she had the disorder because the therapist's questions kind of led her to that. And so that's why we're constantly using research to develop means to have good questions, good objective questions that won't lead clients a certain way. So we can discover how we can, assess them, treat them, help them. But in research, remember, we're looking for that nomothetic understanding. And so with case studies, they're great because they can give us a history of the person's life. Like dissociative identity disorder, people tend to experience trauma in childhood, okay? So that could be anything from like witnessing abuse, like parental abuse, domestic abuse, or violence, or experiencing child abuse themselves, sexual abuse, things of those nature. We're going to look at the circumstances, the therapist or whoever is usually reporting on the circumstances of this person, maybe the behaviors that they do, some of the symptoms they exhibit. It's very detailed, which it's great. It has benefits. The case study is a source of new ideas and discovery, right? So maybe a disorder that doesn't occur very often in the general population, we can study it based on that one person through the details presented in the case study. Tentative support for a theory. So maybe if we keep finding people and keep reporting these case studies, it can kind of help us pull a general trend or an overarching theory for people with a certain disorder. And like I said, opportunities to study unusual problems. But case studies do have limitations, right? It's going to be reported by biased observers. What that means is that whoever is reporting those symptoms, they are kind of looking for them. So if I were to report, let's say I was reporting on anxiety symptoms. I don't know why I use anxiety so much. I feel like it's a pretty common issue in the United States. I guess that's why I use it as an example. If I was going to do a case study on someone's anxiety, and I'm going to write out their history, I'm writing out the history that I think is related to their anxiety. I'm writing out symptoms that are related to their anxiety. I may be overlooking things that don't support their anxiety diagnosis. I may not be looking at the times where they don't have anxiety. So my perception may be a little biased in what I'm reporting in that case because I'm only looking for things that kind of confirm what I'm looking for. Also, like again, that's subjective evidence. And that's little basis for generalization. This is very important. So internal and external validity are concepts we're going to talk about. Internal validity is the idea that when something's valid, it's measuring what it's seeking to measure, right? So internal validity means within a study, we can pinpoint causality. We can pinpoint cause and effect. We can say we've eliminated all these different variables that could affect the results that we did. That's internal validity. So the study in and of itself is valid. The methods we've used are valid. External validity says, it asks if we can generalize that or attribute it to the general population. So with a case study, I'm not going to examine, Sybil, the woman in the picture, and say, okay, well, that's how her dissociative identity disorder presents itself, so that's how everyone with that disorder acts, right? It has low external validity. I can't say, for example, let's do something a little more minor. If I take one student's, Joe Schmo's answers, and say, hey, Joe, how happy are you in my abnormal psychology class? And Joe Schmo says, I'm very happy in this class. And then I turn around and say, okay, Joe's happy, everyone's actually happy in this class because he's representative of everyone in this class, right? I can't do that. So that's little basis for generalization. I can't make these broad generalizations about all people with these disorders based on the information in a case study. Because it's kind of like a journal almost. So, I've included an example of a case study. Let me show you really quickly in our Blackboard portal. So if you go to Content and Assignments, go to our course content folder in Unit 2, you will find in the supplementary materials, there is an interesting, I've added 3 articles, and the third one, no, I'm sorry, I'm confusing my numbers. The first one is going to be a case study into narcissistic personality disorder. I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot because there are some people who believe that the president has this personality disorder. So I chose this article purposefully so that you all can kind of see the details of what underlies that personality disorder in light of its use in our vernacular now. So if you click that attachment, it's going to give you a case study on 2 people with narcissistic personality disorder. And it's really interesting. So I highly recommend you cross-reference that if you want more context into what a case study is. I'm going to stop the video here, so stay tuned for part